Herpes simplex is said to be a viral infection caused by the herpes simplex virus. It is claimed that there are two types of alleged virus: HSV1, associated with lesions around the mouth, and HSV2, associated with lesions around the genitals. Most people seem to get at least one cold sore in their life, and we are told they can be spread by kissing, sharing spoons, or even sharing towels. And with regards to genital herpes, apparently it's spreading almost as easily. But what is the science behind these claims of a virus at work? In this video, we go back 100 years to expose the bizarre human and animal experiments that the whole herpes story is built upon. And a warning for the faint-hearted, we will be exposing some 1920 genitalia as well. The World Health Organization says that HSV1 is mainly transmitted by oral-to-oral contact, causing oral herpes, including symptoms known as cold sores. But it can also lead to genital herpes. And HSV2 is a sexually transmitted infection that causes genital herpes. Apparently, an estimated 3.7 billion people under the age of 50 have HSV1 infection globally. Less people have genital herpes, but the WHO still estimates this to be around 500 million. Now, as you know, when someone makes a claim about alleged viruses causing health problems, we need to see a citation that provides the scientific evidence. The CDC provide lots of information about genital herpes, but as is typical of their publications, they don't provide a citation for claims such as genital herpes is a sexually transmitted disease caused by the herpes simplex virus type 1 or type 2. However, further down on the CDC's information page is a statement: infections are transmitted through contact with HSV and herpes lesions, mucosal surfaces, genital secretions, or oral secretions. And this time there is a reference, which is the chapter Genital Herpes in the textbook Sexually Transmitted Diseases 4th edition. Now, I have the 1st edition, which is fine, as the claim that there is an infectious virus at work dates back far earlier, and the same references continue to be cited to this day. The chapter, which I note was supported in part by a grant from the National Institutes of Health, informs us that genital HSV infection has been clinically recognised since the 1700s. It explains that genital herpes was first described by the French physician Astruc in 1746. The high prevalence in prostitutes in the 1800s was mentioned, as well as the associations with other alleged contagious diseases such as syphilis, chancroid, and gonorrhea. The textbook claims that fluid from oral labial infection was shown to be infectious to other humans in the late 19th century, for which there is no citation. The text goes on to outline the work of Austrian dermatologist Benjamin Lipschutz, and it is alleged that, as well as transferring the disease in rabbits, he inoculated material from genital herpetic lesions into the skin of humans, eliciting clinical infection within 48 to 72 hours in 6 persons, and within 24 days in 1 case. This seems to accept the claims of an infectious virus rather passively, so we obtained a translation of Lipschutz's 1921 German language essay, which translates to Studies on the Etiology of the Diseases of the Herpes Group. Now, at this point, I'm getting a little suspicious. Why is it so hard to find evidence of these foundational studies for major viruses, and the so-called proofs are not even translated into English? In any case, in a summary of his essay, Lipschutz makes the claim at point 3 that genital herpes is an infectious disease that can be transmitted to humans. Not something that we would accept at face value, and it was time to dissect his complete 20,000-word treatise on the topic. Interestingly, in this essay he states all kinds of damage to the organism, infections and intoxications, were said to have the possibility of being able to produce herpes. Indeed, other clinicians of the day were disputing that herpes was the result of a postulated virus and suspected that it was due to other factors related to the underlying condition of the individual. However, germ theory was being indoctrinated into most doctors by this point, and it is clear Lipschutz remains firmly fixed on the virus theory in his analysis. With regards to his animal experiments, Lipschutz scratched the eyes of rabbits before introducing material from genital herpes lesions. He would then observe inflammation or linear opacities in the corneas and concluded that this provided evidence of transmission of an infection. He commented that, in contrast to the mostly refractory behaviour of the rabbit cornea when vaccinating with material from herpes zoster, I have not had a single failure in vaccinating with material from genital herpes. There was no mention of any control experiment where he simply scratched their eyes and introduced biological material said not to contain a herpes virus. Then we get to his alleged human transmission experiments that took place in 1920. In figure 15, we see a photo of a female, known as patient K, with herpetic lesions on her vulva. Lipschutz reports that material was taken from these spots and then a lancet was used to introduce the material into her inner thigh at 2 points to produce these lesions. Apparently this is supposed to be evidence of transmission or self-infection with a virus. In another experiment, he upped the ante and took more material from patient K's vulval spots, diluted it with a little saline, and then injected 6 other people with 1 drop each of the liquid. What was the result of this? He states, even after several days of observation, nothing special can be noticed at the vaccination sites. Instead of rethinking the contagion theory, which was already resorting to methods of exposure not seen in nature, the virus hunter decided that vaccination with the Pravaz injection was avoided in further experiments. Then he went back to his first method and proclaimed success with taking material from another woman with herpes, known as patient BA, and induced skin lesions in other individuals through his lancet traumatizing method. For his next trick, which is outlined in this diagram, he took material from patient BA's self-inoculated traumatized lesion, used a lancet to induce a lesion in subject HA, and then took material from this to cause lesions on a rabbit's eye, after scratching it first, of course. Lipschutz goes on to conclude that with regard to the technique of vaccination, it seems that it is necessary to insert a not too narrow lancet coated with the inoculation material very sharply in order to create a more intensive skin lesion. In other words, nothing will, quote, transmit unless you sufficiently damage the skin. He continued, vaccination is more easily carried out on the rabbit cornea than on the human skin. In other words, amazingly, it is easier to damage rabbit's eyes than human skin with trauma. To explain why herpes lesions could keep appearing, the excuse was invented that humans may be carriers, and small amounts of the virus could easily remain latent in the perineural lymphatic sheaths for a longer period of time. One of the modern-day beliefs alleges that viruses such as herpes simplex remain dormant in the body and reactivate at certain times, which conveniently explains its recurrence in some people. He makes the amusing statement that sexual intercourse with certain women seems to lead particularly easily to the occurrence of genital herpes in men, of which the observations of other French authors speak. From what we saw in his experiments, perhaps these certain women have hidden lancets with which they stab their unsuspecting male victims. In all seriousness though, this is where the trail of evidence leads. Remember, the CDC said that infections are transmitted through contact with HSV and herpes lesions, mucosal surfaces, genital secretions or oral secretions. However, this was never established in these experiments. Firstly, it was just asserted that there was a virus involved in the crude biological specimens, and secondly, contact with the secretions alone did nothing. The skin had to be damaged with a lancet. Once again, there were no control experiments where skin was damaged with a lancet, and then biological material minus the alleged virus was introduced into the wound. So why do these myths continue up to the present day? Well, the germ theory paradigm is persistently shoehorned into biological phenomena, and as you just saw with Lipschutz, he was convinced there was a virus, even though he had no means to prove the existence of one at the time. But what about the images of herpes viruses? Lipschutz didn't have access to any suitable imaging in 1921, as the electron microscope didn't come into use until the 1930s. The CDC claimed that these transmission electron micrographs show herpes viruses, which are around 100 nanometers in diameter. However, there is no evidence provided that those particles are viral in nature. It doesn't matter if they came from someone with herpetic lesions or they have some association with them. A virus is an infectious replication competent parasite, and that can't be established by those images of dead tissue. For a more detailed explanation about images of alleged viruses, you can watch my video, Electron Microscopy and Unidentified Viral Objects. So, how is it that not only is HSV claimed to exist, but there are subtypes known as HSV1 and HSV2? Our next paper is this 1995 publication that claimed to compare the two types. They state, clinically HSV1 is often associated with oral infection, while HSV2 is mostly found in the genital region, although recently it has been recognised that both type 1 and type 2 viruses can be present in any part of the body. So as we have come to expect, the observations are made to fit the theory. Let's dive into the method section. The host cells they used were keratinocytes from surgical specimens. These were treated with antibiotics, antifungals, and buffer solution before mincing of the tissue and transferred to a petri dish, followed by the addition of minimal essential medium and fetal calf serum. Once the cultures were growing, they were then treated with trypsin, EDTA, and glycerol solution before preservation in liquid nitrogen. All perfectly natural, folks. Then the paper states the viruses were obtained from the pool wild-type clinical isolates. They were typed as HSV1 and HSV2 by direct immunofluorescence assay. Well, 75 years on, and the virologists are trying on the same trick as Lipschutz. They are asserting from the start that their specimens contain viruses. In this case, they use the terminology clinical isolate, which potentially leads the uninitiated to believe they have found and physically isolated a virus. Technology is also being called into play as they claim that the viruses are identified by direct immunofluorescence assay. This sounds like a flash technique, when it is merely a process where a fluorescent antibody is designed to react with another molecule, such as a protein. If it is present, the fluorescence becomes visible. When we look at the product details for the imaging kit, it reads, conjugated antibodies bind specifically to conserved epitopes of either HSV1 or HSV2. Here we enter the circular reasoning of virology. They declare that a particular protein is specific to a virus, and therefore anytime it is detected, a virus exists and is present. However, there is no evidence that these proteins are viral in nature. Instead, the evidence they provide is that of 187 specimens evaluated, 60 were positive by both reference cell culture and Imagen HSV typing test. By cell culture, they mean typical HSV cytopathic effect in experiments without controls. To learn more about why cytopathic effects are non-specific, you can watch my video, The COVID-19 Fraud and War on Humanity, Part 1. So going back to the 1995 study claiming to show the difference between HSV1 and 2, it is evident that their assertion that viruses were obtained from the pool wild-type clinical isolates is unsubstantiated. All they could say is that they detected some proteins in the specimens. Their charts showing purported effects of the alleged viruses in various human tissues are meaningless, as they are simply tissue breakdown experiments, once again with no controls in place. The evidence for a virus collapses. Of all the imagined viruses, HSV probably has the most excuses, including that it can be asymptomatic or deadly, that it can be dormant for decades at a time, and that it can be activated by trauma, exposure to wind, or even sunlight. From my perspective, it is all to make the observations fit the viral theory. However, as there has been no demonstration of a virus, we have to look for other causes of clinical herpes simplex, and unfortunately this has received very little attention. In any case, the viral model offers nothing helpful except claims, often in industry-sponsored publications, that big pharma antiviral drugs help, or that they'll try to make a vaccine for.
Sponsored by Pfizer.
From a terrain theory perspective, reactions involving blistering are often an attempt by the body to rid itself of a toxin, and this can come in many forms, whether it be ingested from the diet or pharmaceuticals, inhaled, or simply something that was applied to the skin. Additionally, the role of psychological stress can never be underestimated in these conditions, and many people report that herpetic lesions appear at times of high mental stress. In this regard, I would suggest watching Tom Cowan's video called Live Q&A Webinar from May 27th, 2022. Tom talks about lichen sclerosis, which is another condition that can affect the genital region. He explores the reasons why it may manifest, including from a holistic and spiritual perspective. Usefully in the same video, Tom also discusses the circular reasoning employed by the virologists when they claim their tests prove the existence of alleged viruses like monkeypox, with more examples like I've just presented. My advice is the same as it is for all of these alleged viral conditions. Forget about phony wars on microbes and concentrate on keeping your body in the best possible condition. The purest water, an organic diet, no chemicals or unnecessary drugs, good hygiene, and a peaceful mind will all help. If you are experiencing herpes or other skin reactions, it is just the time to reflect on what you are doing in your life and asking the honest question of how your body became toxic. It is an exercise which involves reviewing everything, from your drinking water to your social relationships. That's all for now, but you are always welcome to join me in more videos where we examine the science behind disease and look for better ways to achieve your best health. To help sustain my channel in this time of censorship, please support my work on Subscribestar. Link is in the description. So that we don't lose touch, please find me at drsambailey.com and sign up for my free newsletter.